What would you do if you came home early and discovered a shattering betrayal that changed everything you thought you knew about your family? For Connor Hughes, a grieving millionaire with an autistic son who has never spoken a single word, that moment arrives on a humid Tuesday afternoon in Gainesville, Florida. When he opens his son's bedroom door, what he witnesses doesn't just break his heart, it unleashes a 7-year silence that has been waiting to shatter. But this betrayal is just the first domino in a decades-old conspiracy of secrets, lies, and unspeakable abuse. As Connor's son Eli finally begins to speak, each word unravels another layer of a nightmare that spans generations. What could a non-verbal child possibly know about events that happened before he was born? And why is everyone from Connor's fiancée to the local sheriff desperate to keep Eli silent? Follow us for more heart-stopping true stories that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about family, faith, and the darkness that sometimes hides behind the most trusted faces. Like and comment to let us know where you're watching from, and share your thoughts on this shocking story of a father's love pushed to unimaginable limits. The air hung heavy over Gainesville that Tuesday afternoon, the kind of Florida humidity that clings to your skin and makes time itself feel sluggish. Connor Hughes gripped the steering wheel of his Audi, knuckles white as he turned onto the tree-lined street where his colonial-style home stood. The houses in this neighborhood were set far apart, each with its own private story. His was a story of unexpected wealth, unexpected loss, and a son who had never spoken a single word until today. Connor hadn't planned to return from his business trip to Atlanta a day early. Something had nagged at him all morning, a heaviness in his chest he couldn't explain. A father's instinct, perhaps. His thoughts drifted to Eli, his 7-year-old son with eyes so intensely blue they sometimes startled strangers, eyes that somehow managed to express everything the boy couldn't say aloud. The doctors had diagnosed Eli with autism when he was 3, but Connor always felt there was something else, something deeper, behind his son's silence. Since Claire's death 14 months ago, the boy had retreated even further into himself, communicating only through his detailed drawings and subtle expressions that Connor had learned to read like a private language between them. "It'll be good to surprise him," Connor whispered to himself, allowing a small smile as he pulled into the driveway. Aubrey's sleek BMW was parked in its usual spot. His fiancée had been a blessing these past 6 months. Beautiful, organized, and seemingly understanding of the complicated package deal that was Connor and his silent son. She'd volunteered to cut her own business trip short to watch Eli when Connor's emergency meeting came up. The house was unnervingly quiet as he slipped in through the side door, using his key instead of the code to preserve the surprise. No cartoons blaring from the living room TV. No piano music that Aubrey sometimes played in the afternoons. Connor set his briefcase down, listening. That's when he heard it. Muffled voices from upstairs. One voice, actually. Aubrey's, but with a tone he'd never heard before. Sharp, cutting, venomous. Connor moved silently across the marble foyer, his heart suddenly hammering against his ribs. He took the stairs 2 at a time, the plush carpet muffling his footsteps. The voice grew louder as he approached Eli's bedroom door, which was slightly ajar. "You're nothing but dead weight." Aubrey's voice sliced through the air. "You can't do anything right. You can't even speak. Why couldn't you have gone with your mother?" Time stopped. Connor's breath caught in his throat, a painful knot forming. His hand trembled as he slowly pushed the door open. The scene before him seared into his memory forever. Eli, his small frame pressed against the corner of his blue bedroom, his favorite dinosaur pajamas rumpled, face streaked with silent tears, and Aubrey, kneeling before him, her perfectly manicured hand raised high, poised to strike. Her beautiful face twisted into something unrecognizable, something monstrous. Eli's eyes, those impossibly blue eyes, locked with Connor's. A silent scream, a plea. Something primal erupted from Connor's chest, a sound he didn't recognize as his own. "Get away from him." Aubrey spun around, her expression transforming instantly from rage to shock. "Connor, you're early." Her hand lowered slowly, her voice shifting into the sweet, melodic tone he knew so well. "Sweetie, this isn't what it looks like. Eli was having another one of his episodes and I was just—" "Stop." Connor's voice was steel. He moved between them, shielding his son. "Get out. Now." "Connor, please." Aubrey's eyes filled with practiced tears. "You know how difficult he can be. I've been trying so hard, but he—" "I said get out!" Connor roared, his entire body shaking. "Don't make me tell you again." The silence that followed was deafening. Aubrey's mask slipped for just a second, just long enough for Connor to glimpse something cold and calculating behind her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak again, but then the impossible happened. Small fingers clutched at Connor's shirt from behind, gripping tightly, desperately, and then a sound so unexpected it seemed to alter the very atmosphere in the room. "Daddy!" The word hung in the air like a physical thing. One simple word, barely above a whisper, raspy from disuse. Connor turned slowly, sinking to his knees. Eli's blue eyes were wide, brimming with tears, his small chest heaving with emotion. "Daddy," Eli said again, the word breaking in the middle, his voice cracking like thin ice. Connor pulled his son against his chest, his own tears falling freely now. 7 years of silence shattered by a single word, the most important word in the universe. "It's okay, buddy," Connor whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Daddy's here now. Daddy's got you." Behind them, Aubrey stood frozen, her face unreadable. But Connor wasn't looking at her anymore. All that mattered was the small boy in his arms, and the word that had finally broken through years of silence. What he didn't see was the calculating look that crossed Aubrey's face, a look that suggested this was only the beginning of something much darker. What he didn't know was that Eli's first word was about to unravel secrets that had been buried for generations. And what neither of them realized was that the real nightmare hadn't even begun. The digital clock on Connor's nightstand cast an eerie blue glow across the darkened bedroom. 3:17 a.m. He hadn't slept, couldn't sleep. His back ached from sitting propped against the headboard for hours, but he refused to move. Not with Eli finally sleeping against his chest, the boy's small fingers still clutching his father's shirt as if afraid he might disappear. Connor studied his son's face in the dim light. Those long eyelashes, Claire's nose, the faint freckles across the bridge, all peaceful now, though occasionally a small whimper would escape, and Eli's fingers would tighten their grip. Each time Connor would whisper, "It's okay, buddy. Daddy's here." And somehow, miraculously, Eli would settle again. On the bedside table lay a stack of drawings Eli had made throughout the night, each more disturbing than the last. The same image repeated obsessively. A locked cabinet or closet with heavy chains drawn in angry black crayon, and beside it, a female silhouette, faceless, but unmistakably feminine in its outline. Each drawing was more frantic than the previous, the crayon sometimes tearing through the paper. "What did she do to you?" Connor whispered, gently stroking his son's hair. "What else happened when I wasn't here?" His mind drifted to Claire, her gentle smile, the way she'd sing off-key while making pancakes on Sunday mornings, how she'd known exactly what Eli needed without words. After her cancer diagnosis, she'd made Connor promise to take care of their son, to protect him. "He sees the world differently," she'd said from her hospital bed, her once vibrant voice barely audible. "That makes him vulnerable, but it also makes him special. Don't ever let anyone take that away." Had Connor broken that promise by bringing Aubrey into their lives so quickly? 6 months after Claire's death, had it been too soon? The guilt crashed over him in waves. A soft knock at the bedroom door pulled him from his thoughts. Connor tensed, instinctively tightening his hold on Eli. "Connor?" Aubrey's voice, honeyed and contrite. "Please, can we talk?" He'd ordered her to pack a bag and stay at a hotel for the night. He should have called the police, he knew that, but the shock of Eli speaking had overwhelmed everything else. "Go away," he called, keeping his voice low enough not to wake Eli. "Please." Her voice cracked convincingly. "What you saw, it wasn't what it looked like. Eli was having a meltdown. I was just trying to—" "I saw exactly what it was." Connor cut her off, ice in his voice. "There's nothing you can say that will make it okay. We're done, Aubrey. I want you out of our lives." A long silence followed, so long that Connor thought she might have left. Then a different tone altogether, colder, sharper. "You think you know everything about your perfect little family, don't you?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper but somehow penetrating the thick wooden door. "If you knew who your precious Claire really was, you wouldn't trust even that boy in your arms." Connor carefully extracted himself from beneath Eli, laying the boy gently on the pillow. He crossed the room in 3 quick strides and yanked the door open, expecting to confront Aubrey face to face. But the hallway was empty, just the faint scent of her expensive perfume lingering in the air. From downstairs came the sound of the front door closing with a decisive click. Connor stood frozen. Aubrey's words playing on repeat in his mind. What did she mean about Claire? It was a desperate attempt to deflect blame, surely. And yet, he returned to the bed, his gaze falling on his phone. Without thinking twice, he dialed a number he hadn't called in months. Hello? A groggy female voice answered on the fourth ring. Julia, it's Connor Hughes. I'm sorry to call so late, but I need your help. Julia Thompson had been Claire's hospice nurse in those final weeks, the only person outside family who'd witnessed Claire's rapid decline. She'd formed a bond with both Claire and Eli, staying even on her days off just to read to him or sit in comfortable silence. Connor, what's wrong? Julia was instantly alert, professional instincts kicking in. It's Eli. He spoke today. Connor's voice cracked. And Aubrey. I caught her about to hit him. Oh my God, Julia gasped. Is he okay? Physically, yes, but there's more. Can you come over tomorrow morning? There's something I need to show you. After hanging up, Connor returned to Eli's side, his mind racing. Something about Aubrey's parting words nagged at him. Claire had always been somewhat private about her childhood, orphaned young, raised by distant relatives, but Connor had never sensed any dark secrets. Had he missed something? The next morning, Julia arrived promptly at 9, her kind face etched with concern. Eli was in the sunroom with his crayons, seemingly calmer in the daylight, but still not speaking again. Has he said anything else? Julia asked, watching Eli through the doorway. Connor shook his head. Just Daddy yesterday, but he's been drawing nonstop. He showed her the drawings, and Julia's brow furrowed deeply. Connor, I need to tell you something, she said finally. The day before Claire died, when you went home to shower, she made me promise not to tell you something unless I felt Eli was in danger. Connor's heart raced. What is it? Julia hesitated, then said, she was afraid of something or someone. She kept saying she should have faced it before Eli was born. Faced what? She wouldn't say. But she mentioned a trunk in your basement. Said everything you needed to know was there. Connor didn't remember any trunk, but the basement had been Claire's domain. Her art studio, her sanctuary. He led Julia downstairs, flipping on lights as they descended. The basement was largely unchanged since Claire's death. Her canvases still leaning against walls, paintbrushes in jars, the scent of oils and turpentine faded but present. In the far corner, behind a stack of canvases, sat an antique trunk Connor had assumed was filled with art supplies. Julia froze when she saw it. That's it, she whispered. Connor approached slowly, as if the trunk might bite. It was locked, an ornate brass padlock securing the latch. She told me you should open it if anything strange happened with Eli, Julia said quietly. After searching Claire's old desk, Connor found a small key taped beneath a drawer. It fit the padlock perfectly. The trunk's hinges groaned as he lifted the lid. Inside was not art supplies, but a single envelope atop a folded blanket. Connor's name was written on it in Claire's delicate handwriting. With trembling fingers, he opened it. A single sheet of paper with a single line. Protect Eli from what I never could face. Rain pattered against the windshield as Connor sat in his parked car outside the Alachua County Records office. Claire's cryptic note burning a hole in his pocket. Protect Eli from what I never could face. 7 words that had kept him awake for the past 3 nights. 7 words that felt like the first piece of a puzzle he never knew existed. Inside the trunk, beneath the note and blanket, he'd found a small, worn teddy bear with one eye missing and a folder containing Claire's original birth certificate. Not the one in their safe at home, but an earlier version listing her birth parents as unknown. Connor had always known Claire was adopted, but she'd told him her birth parents had died in a car accident. Why the lie? The county clerk, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and reading glasses that hung from a beaded chain around her neck, looked up as Connor approached her desk. I'm researching my late wife's childhood, Connor explained, sliding the birth certificate across the counter. Claire Hayes. She was in foster care for a while before being adopted by the Hayeses when she was 10. I'm trying to find records of where she was before that. The clerk frowned, studying the document. This would have been late 80s, early 90s? At Connor's nod, she sighed. Those records might be tricky. A lot from that era weren't digitized properly. Let me see what I can find. 30 minutes later, Connor stared at a sparse file containing only the barest details of Claire's early life. One entry, however, made his blood run cold. Resident, New Light Children's Home, 1989-1992. What was New Light? Connor asked. The clerk's expression darkened. Religious group that ran a home for orphans and troubled children. Shut down in '94 after allegations of, well, abuse. Physical, psychological. Some said worse. She lowered her voice. There was a big cover-up. The pastor had connections in local government. Most records were sealed or lost. Connor felt sick. And my wife was there for 3 years? If these records are correct? She hesitated. Sir, if you're looking into this, be careful. Some powerful people were implicated but never charged. Even after all these years, people don't like talking about New Light. Rain had given way to a sweltering afternoon by the time Connor returned home. As he pulled into his driveway, he noticed his elderly neighbor, Ms. Lorraine, tending to her rose bushes along the fence that separated their properties. At 78, with snow-white hair always perfectly coiffed and bright lipstick that never seemed to fade, Ms. Lorraine had been a fixture in the neighborhood long before Connor and Claire moved in. What caught Connor's eye, however, was Eli. The boy stood on their side of the fence watching Ms. Lorraine intently. More surprisingly, Ms. Lorraine was speaking to him, and Eli appeared to be listening with unusual focus. Connor approached slowly, not wanting to disturb whatever connection was forming. Well, hello there, Connor, Ms. Lorraine called, straightening with a slight wince. Your boy and I were just having a nice chat about my tea roses. He's got a good eye for beauty, just like his mama. Connor smiled, placing a gentle hand on Eli's shoulder. Has he said anything to you? Ms. Lorraine's eyes twinkled. Not in so many words, but we understand each other just fine, don't we, sweet pea? She winked at Eli, who, to Connor's astonishment, gave a small smile in return. Ms. Lorraine, Connor began hesitantly. You knew Claire pretty well, didn't you? Oh, we had our fence talks nearly every day, she replied, removing her gardening gloves. That girl loved her garden almost as much as she loved you two. Did she ever mention her childhood to you or a place called New Light? Something flashed in Ms. Lorraine's eyes. Recognition, then caution. She glanced at Eli, then back to Connor. Perhaps we should have a proper chat, neighbor to neighbor. Why don't you both come over for some lemonade? I just made a fresh pitcher. Ms. Lorraine's living room was like stepping into another era. Floral wallpaper, doilies on armrests, and photographs spanning decades. She settled Eli at the kitchen table with lemonade and cookies, then led Connor to a sunroom at the back of the house. I don't know much, she said once they were seated. Her voice lowered. Claire was private about her past, but in those last months, when she was sick, she'd come to the fence almost every afternoon, sometimes just to cry where Eli couldn't see her. Connor's throat tightened. Did she say why? Not directly, but once she said something that struck me as odd. She said, Aubrey is the only one who knows, but she'll destroy everything. Ms. Lorraine's gaze was piercing. I assumed Aubrey was a friend from her past, until I met your fiancé at the neighborhood barbecue last month. The revelation hit Connor like a physical blow. You're saying Claire knew Aubrey before I met her? I'm saying, Ms. Lorraine chose her words carefully, that your Claire was terrified of something in her past. And when I met Aubrey, I got the distinct impression she wasn't who she claimed to be. Connor's phone buzzed. A text from Julia saying she'd located a former nurse who had worked at New Light. But something else caught his attention. A missed call from Aubrey, and a voicemail. Excusing himself, Connor stepped onto Ms. Lorraine's porch to listen. Aubrey's voice was eerily calm. By now you're digging, Connor. Just like Claire knew you would. You think you're protecting Eli, but you don't understand. I tried to save you from this. I really did. A pause. I loved you in my way. But now that Eli's talking, you're going to learn who he really is. The line went dead, leaving Connor staring at his phone in confusion and mounting dread. Back inside, he found Ms. Lorraine showing Eli a photo album. The boy was pointing at a particular photograph. Claire, visibly pregnant, sitting on Ms. Lorraine's porch swing. She came here that day very upset, Ms. Lorraine explained. Said she'd seen someone from her past in town, someone who shouldn't have found her. Later that evening, after settling Eli into bed, Connor received a call from his family lawyer, Richard Goldman. Connor, something unusual has come up, Richard said without preamble. I was reviewing Claire's estate documents today and found a reference to a second will, one I never drew up. A second will? Connor frowned. What does it say? That's just it. I can't find the actual document. Just a notation in her personal files about a contingency testament to be opened only if, well, the exact words were if Eli reveals what he knows. Connor sank onto the edge of his bed, the phone barely steady in his hand. And there's more, Richard continued. The notation included a strange phrase, "My greatest secret lives in our son's eyes." After hanging up, Connor went to Eli's room and gently sat on the edge of his bed. The boy was sleeping peacefully for once, clutching the one-eyed teddy bear from Claire's trunk. "What do you know, buddy?" Connor whispered, brushing a strand of hair from his son's forehead. "What are you trying to tell me?" As if in answer, Eli's eyes fluttered open, those startling blue eyes that had always seemed to hold depths beyond his years. For a moment, father and son just looked at each other in the dim glow of the nightlight. Then Eli spoke his second-ever sentence, his voice soft but clear. "The bad lady knows where the monster hides. The bad lady knows where the monster hides." Eli's words echoed in Connor's mind as he sat in the waiting room of Dr. Samantha Winter's office. The child behavioral specialist came highly recommended for her work with trauma and selective mutism in children on the autism spectrum. The walls of her waiting area were painted a soothing blue, with abstract ocean murals that seemed to move if you stared too long. A fish tank bubbled quietly in the corner, home to a kaleidoscope of tropical fish that darted between miniature castle ruins. Eli sat cross-legged on the carpet, methodically arranging wooden blocks into perfect columns. 3 days had passed since he'd spoken his second sentence, and he hadn't uttered another word since. But something had changed. He was more present now, his eyes frequently meeting Connor's, searching for something. "Mr. Hughes?" A petite woman with curly gray hair and kind eyes appeared in the doorway. "I'm Dr. Winters. Eli and I are going to spend some time together while you fill out a few more forms. Is that okay?" Connor nodded, watching anxiously as Eli rose without protest and took the doctor's outstretched hand. It was the first time since the incident with Aubrey that Eli had willingly gone with someone other than Connor. "He'll be just fine," Dr. Winters assured him with a warm smile. "There's a one-way window in my office. You can observe everything once you're done with the paperwork." 20 minutes later, Connor stood behind the glass watching his son sitting at a small table covered with art supplies. Dr. Winters sat across from him, speaking softly as Eli selected a black crayon and began to draw with intense focus. "He's been drawing the same scene over and over," Connor explained to Dr. Winters' assistant, a young man taking notes beside him. "An armoire or cabinet with chains, and a female figure." The assistant nodded. "Dr. Winters will help him process whatever that image represents. She's excellent at—" He stopped abruptly. "Oh, that's new." Connor looked back through the window. Eli had completed a different drawing, a crude but recognizable image of a pregnant woman crying, standing before a male figure with a jagged line across his face. The man's hand was outstretched toward the woman in what appeared to be a threatening gesture. "Has he drawn this before?" the assistant asked quietly. Connor shook his head, an uncomfortable knot forming in his stomach. "Never." After the session, Dr. Winters invited Connor into her office while Eli waited with the assistant in a playroom. "Mr. Hughes," she began, hands folded on her desk, "I believe Eli is processing traumatic memories." "But that's impossible," Connor interjected. "The drawing he made, Claire was never threatened by a man with a scar, and Eli wasn't even born yet." Dr. Winters nodded thoughtfully. "Children's minds work differently than ours. Sometimes they absorb things we don't realize. Conversations overheard, photos seen, stories told. Other times," she hesitated, "other times they're remembering something they shouldn't have been able to witness." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Eli may be recalling something he saw or heard before he could consciously process it. Prenatal memories are controversial in my field, but not unheard of. Or perhaps what? Perhaps he's remembering something Claire told him. Children with autism often have remarkable memory for details others might dismiss." Connor left the appointment with a referral to a trauma specialist and more questions than answers. He drove on autopilot to his next destination, the modest suburban home of Claire's adopted brother, Mason Hayes. They'd never been close even before Claire's death, and Mason had attended the funeral with visible reluctance, leaving immediately after the service. The house looked neglected, gutters sagging, lawn overgrown, a rusted pickup in the driveway. Connor took a deep breath before knocking on the door. Mason answered on the third knock, looking older than his 37 years. His eyes narrowed when he recognized Connor. "What do you want?" No pretense of pleasantries. "I need to talk to you about Claire," Connor said firmly. "About her childhood, about New Light." Something flickered across Mason's face. Fear, maybe anger. Got nothing to say about that. He tried to close the door, but Connor blocked it with his foot. "Mason, please, it's important for Eli's sake." "Eli?" Mason scoffed. "That kid is exactly why you should let sleeping dogs lie." Connor's patience snapped. "My son is starting to talk, and what he's saying, what he's drawing, suggests he knows something about Claire's past, something that might put him in danger." Mason stared at him for a long moment, then stepped back with a resigned sigh. "Fine. You want to dig up ghosts? Don't say I didn't warn you." The interior of the house was as neglected as the exterior. Unwashed dishes, furniture that had seen better decades, the acrid smell of cigarettes embedded in every surface. Mason cleared takeout containers from a kitchen chair and gestured for Connor to sit. "Claire tell you she was adopted?" Mason asked, lighting a cigarette despite Connor's obvious discomfort. "Yes, she said her birth parents died in an accident." Mason laughed bitterly. "That's a nice fairy tale. Truth is, nobody knew who her parents were. She was left at a hospital, then bounced through foster care until she ended up at New Light when she was 7. I was already there, 10 years old, and already designated a problem child because I wouldn't stop asking questions." "Questions about what?" Mason took a long drag of his cigarette, eyes distant. "About the kids who disappeared. About why some got special prayer sessions in Pastor Raymond's office." His gaze sharpened on Connor. Claire was his favorite, always pulling her aside, telling her she was specially chosen. I tried to protect her, but he trailed off, his expression hardening. "When the Hayes family adopted us, we thought we'd escaped. But Claire was never the same." "What happened to her at New Light?" Connor pressed. Mason's face contorted with sudden rage. "Claire never should have had that kid," he spat. "She swore that whole nightmare was over. She promised it was buried." "What are you talking about?" Connor demanded, rising to his feet. "What does Eli have to do with any of this?" Mason seemed to catch himself, eyes widening slightly. "Get out," he said, voice suddenly cold. "And if you've got any sense, you'll stop digging before you find what you're looking for." That night, Connor put Eli to bed earlier than usual. The boy had been agitated since their return from Mason's house, repeatedly drawing the scared man with increasing intensity until he'd finally collapsed into exhaustion. Around midnight, Connor was startled awake by screams coming from Eli's room. He bolted down the hallway to find his son thrashing wildly in bed, trapped in the grip of a night terror. "Eli, wake up, buddy. It's just a dream." Connor gathered his son in his arms, heart breaking as the boy's small body trembled violently. "You're safe. Daddy's here." Gradually, Eli's eyes focused, recognition dawning. His breathing slowed, but his fingers dug painfully into Connor's arms. "She put me in the closet," Eli whispered, each word distinct despite his labored breathing. "With the hell book." "Who did, buddy?" Connor asked gently, though a chill ran through him. "Aubrey?" Eli shook his head frantically. "Before, when I was in Mommy's tummy." Connor froze, Dr. Winter's words rushing back. Perhaps he's remembering something he shouldn't have been able to witness. After settling Eli back to sleep, Connor prowled through the house, searching for anything that might explain his son's words. In Claire's old office, he studied the built-in bookshelves for the 1,000th time, running his fingers along the edges. Something about the wall behind Claire's desk had always seemed slightly off. The dimensions didn't quite match the room's exterior. On impulse, Connor pressed against different sections of the paneling until, with a soft click, a small section swung inward. Inside the hidden compartment was a leather-bound journal, its pages water-damaged and many torn out. But one entry remained intact, dated just months before Eli's birth. "If anything happens to me, he'll try to destroy the evidence. But Eli saw everything, and someday, he'll remember." The abandoned New Light Children's Home loomed against the afternoon sky like a decaying tooth. A 3-story Victorian monstrosity with boarded windows and a sagging roof. Weeds strangled what had once been a manicured lawn, and the wrought iron gate hung askew from rusted hinges. A faded sign, barely legible through years of weather damage, still proclaimed, "Suffer the little children to come unto me." Connor sat in his car, hands clenched around the steering wheel. wondering if he'd lost his mind coming here. The journal entry had haunted him for days. Eli saw everything, and someday he'll remember. How could an unborn child see anything? What could Claire possibly have meant? He'd left Eli with Julia for the afternoon, telling her only that he was following a lead about Claire's past. The 6-hour drive to this remote corner of rural Georgia had given him too much time to think, to doubt, to fear. Taking a deep breath, Connor stepped out of the car. The summer heat hit him like a physical force, the humidity making his shirt cling to his back instantly. Cicadas screamed from the surrounding woods, creating an unsettling soundtrack as he approached the building. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, topped with rusted barbed wire, designed more to keep people in than out. Connor thought grimly. He found a section where the fence had been cut, likely by local teenagers looking for a spooky place to drink beer, judging by the empty cans littering the ground. The front door was padlocked, but a side entrance had been pried open. Connor slipped inside, immediately assaulted by the smell of mold, rot, and something else. Something chemical. The floorboards creaked ominously beneath his feet as he moved through what appeared to have been a reception area. Graffiti covered the walls, obscene drawings and phrases competing with peeling institutional green paint. Connor pulled out his flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom to reveal a central staircase and corridors branching in both directions. A faded directory on the wall listed various rooms: administration, dining hall, boys' dormitory, girls' dormitory, infirmary, and at the bottom, prayer room and counseling. Something about the last entry sent a chill down Connor's spine. Mason's words echoed in his mind. Special prayer sessions in Pastor Raymond's office. Connor headed toward the administrative wing, reasoning that any records would most likely be there. The first few offices he checked had been completely cleaned out. Empty filing cabinets with drawers hanging open, desks stripped of anything useful. But the third office, a larger corner room with director stenciled on the frosted glass door, yielded something unexpected. Behind a fallen bookcase, Connor discovered a metal box that had been partially burned, as if someone had attempted to destroy its contents but been interrupted. Inside were charred papers, most too damaged to read, and a VHS tape labeled in faded marker, C. Hayes, Prayer Room, 1993. Connor's heart hammered against his ribs. C. Hayes, Claire Hayes. With trembling hands, he pocketed the tape and continued searching. Most of the documents were administrative minutiae, supply orders, staff schedules, but one partially burned memo caught his eye. Concerns about R. Hayes' special counseling sessions must be addressed. 3 parents have now withdrawn their children with similar allegations. While the board remains committed to spiritual healing methods we cannot ignore, the rest was illegible, burned away by whoever had tried to destroy the evidence. Connor photographed everything with his phone before carefully replacing the box exactly as he'd found it. The prayer room was located in the basement. Connor descended the stairs slowly, each step feeling like a journey deeper into a nightmare. Unlike the upper floors, the basement showed fewer signs of teenage intruders. Perhaps they'd found it too unsettling even for drunken dares. The corridor was lined with several small rooms, each with a heavy door and a small observation window. Reflection rooms, according to the faded labels. Isolation chambers in reality. At the end of the hall stood a larger door with prayer and counseling, painted in elaborate script. It was locked, but the wood around the handle had rotted enough that Connor was able to force it open with his shoulder. Inside was a stark contrast to the decay of the rest of the building. This room had been meticulously sealed, plastic sheeting taped over the single window, the door frame sealed with weather stripping. It was as if someone had wanted to preserve it exactly as it had been. A large wooden desk dominated the space. Behind it, a wall of bookshelves held religious texts, their leather spines cracked with age. An antique armoire stood in one corner, the same style Eli had been drawing obsessively, Connor realized with a jolt. And mounted on the wall was a video camera, its lens aimed at a small chair in the center of the room. Connor's skin crawled as he looked around. This room felt wrong in a way he couldn't articulate, sterile yet somehow unclean. His gaze fell on a book lying open on the desk, its pages yellow with age. Deliverance from Generational Curses. The title read. Passages about bloodline demons and spiritual cleansing were heavily underlined. As Connor turned to leave, his flashlight beam caught something on the floor beneath the desk, a small tarnished cross on a broken chain. He picked it up, somehow knowing before he turned it over that he would find Claire's initials engraved on the back. The 6-hour drive back to Gainesville passed in a blur of mounting dread. Connor called Julia from the road, asking if she could bring Eli to her apartment instead of Connor's house. "And do you still have that old VCR?" he asked. "I need to watch something." Julia's apartment was small but cozy, filled with plants and colorful textiles from her travels. Eli was already asleep in her spare bedroom when Connor arrived, exhausted from an afternoon at the Children's Museum. "You look terrible," Julia said bluntly, taking in Connor's disheveled appearance. "What did you find?" Connor wordlessly handed her the tape. "I need to see what's on this." Julia's ancient VCR whirred and clicked as it accepted the tape. For a moment, there was only static. Then the screen cleared to show the prayer room, exactly as Connor had seen it that afternoon, but cleaner, brighter, in use. A young girl sat in the small chair, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, her hands folded nervously in her lap. Though the video quality was poor, Connor would have recognized Claire anywhere. Those same blue eyes that Eli had inherited, that same determined set of her jaw. A man moved into the frame, standing behind her, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a clerical collar. As he turned toward the camera, Connor inhaled sharply. A jagged scar ran from the corner of his right eye down to his mouth, exactly as Eli had drawn. "Today we continue Claire's spiritual cleansing," the man said, his voice smooth, authoritative. "The generational demons that have plagued her bloodline must be cast out before they can manifest." Connor and Julia watched in silent horror as the man, Pastor Raymond, according to the caption at the bottom of the screen, subjected Claire to what could only be described as psychological torture disguised as religious ritual. The session lasted nearly an hour, with Raymond repeatedly telling Claire she was tainted, cursed, and marked by sin. When the tape finally ended, Julia was crying silently. Connor sat frozen, his mind struggling to process what he'd seen. "That man," Julia whispered. "The one with the scar. Claire drew him once when she was delirious from the pain medication. I thought it was just a nightmare." Connor turned to her, a terrible suspicion forming. "Julia, when Claire was pregnant with Eli, did anything unusual happen? Anything she might have kept from me?" Julia hesitated. "She disappeared for 3 days in her second trimester. She made me swear never to tell you. When she came back, she said she'd faced her demons but that it wasn't over. I always assumed it was a figure of speech." Connor pulled out his phone and called up the image of Claire's journal entry. "If anything happens to me, he'll try to destroy the evidence. But Eli saw everything. And someday, he'll remember." The he wasn't Connor, as he'd initially thought. It was Pastor Raymond. And whatever Claire had faced during those missing 3 days, somehow, impossibly, Eli had witnessed it too. The name Raymond Hayes glowed on Connor's laptop screen, surrounded by browser tabs filled with newspaper clippings, court records, and social media searches. 3 days had passed since he'd watched the disturbing VHS tape, and he'd barely slept, driven by a desperate need to understand what had happened to Claire and what it meant for Eli. Dawn was breaking outside his home office window, painting the sky in watercolor hues of pink and gold that belied the darkness of his discoveries. Coffee cups littered the desk, testament to his sleepless vigil. On the wall, he'd created an improvised investigation board. Photos, timeline, connections marked with colored string. At the center was a grainy image he'd managed to extract from the VHS. Raymond Hayes, the man with the scar. "You didn't just disappear," Connor muttered, staring at the photo. "People like you never do." The trail had been deliberately obscured. After New Light Children's Home closed in 1994 amid allegations of abuse, Raymond Hayes had vanished from official records. No death certificate, no new Social Security activity. But people remembered him. Connor had found former members of New Light through online support groups, and their recollections painted a disturbing picture. Hayes had been charismatic, feared, revered by some. He preached about generational demons and bloodline curses passed from parent to child. He claimed the power to cleanse children of these spiritual taints through his special prayer sessions. And when the allegations mounted and authorities finally intervened, he disappeared with a handful of his most devoted followers. A sudden noise from downstairs jolted Connor from his thoughts. He glanced at the baby monitor showing Eli still sound asleep in his bedroom, then grabbed his phone and moved cautiously toward the staircase. The house was silent again, but something felt wrong. A shift in the air, a presence. Connor descended the stairs slowly, every sense heightened. The living room was empty, the kitchen undisturbed. But as he turned toward the back of the house, he noticed the door to the sunroom was slightly ajar, the morning breeze stirring the curtains. He approached cautiously, phone ready to dial 911. Then he saw her, Aubrey, standing in the center of the room, perfectly still. She wore a simple white dress, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders, looking nothing like the polished businesswoman he'd known. "You shouldn't be here," Connor said, his voice hard. "I could have you arrested." Aubrey smiled, a sad, knowing expression. "But you won't, because now you have questions only I can answer. How did you get in?" She held up a key. "Claire gave it to me, long before you knew me." Connor's mind raced. "You knew Claire before we met, before she died. You weren't just some woman I happened to meet at a charity event. Nothing in your life has been coincidence, Connor." Aubrey moved toward Claire's old drawing table, running her fingers along its surface with familiar ease. "I was sent to watch over you and Eli, to protect you both, until I couldn't anymore." "Protect us? You were abusing my son." Pain flickered across Aubrey's face. "What you saw that day, I was trying to make him forget, to keep him silent, for all our sakes." She sank into a chair, suddenly looking exhausted. But when he spoke, when he finally broke his silence, I knew it was too late. The memories were coming back. "What memories?" Connor demanded. He was an infant. He couldn't possibly remember anything about Claire's past. Aubrey laughed, a hollow sound. "That's what the rational mind says, isn't it? But some traumas run deeper than consciousness. They're carried in the blood, in the soul." She fixed Connor with an intense gaze. "Raymond Hayes isn't just the man who tormented Claire as a child. He's Claire's biological father." The revelation hit Connor like a physical blow. "That's impossible. Claire was abandoned as a baby. She never knew her birth parents." "That's what the official records say," Aubrey agreed. "But Raymond kept his own records. Children born within New Light were rarely registered properly. Some were listed as abandoned, others as stillborn. Raymond controlled everything. And Claire was his daughter?" Connor felt sick. "One of many," Aubrey said softly. He believed he was creating a pure bloodline chosen by God. When Claire was old enough to understand what was happening, she ran away. Eventually, she was placed with the Hayes family. She thought she was safe. Connor struggled to process this new information, but she wasn't. "Raymond never lets go of what he considers his," Aubrey confirmed. "He found her again when she was in college. By then he'd established a new community in rural Alabama, smaller, more secretive. He tried to bring her back into the fold." Aubrey's voice faltered. "She refused. Met you, got married, thought she could have a normal life. Until she got pregnant with Eli," Connor whispered, the pieces falling into terrible place. Aubrey nodded. "Raymond believes his bloodline carries special gifts, sensitivities. When he learned Claire was pregnant, he became obsessed with the child. During her second trimester, he had her abducted. Those 3 days she disappeared. He performed rituals on her, on the unborn baby, claimed he could awaken Eli's spiritual sight, even in the womb." Connor's hands clenched into fists. "That's why Eli can remember things he couldn't possibly have seen. What Raymond did to him before he was even born." "Yes." Aubrey's gaze dropped to her hands. "Claire escaped again, but she knew Raymond would never stop. When she was diagnosed with cancer, she reached out to me." "And who exactly are you to Raymond?" Connor demanded, though he already suspected the answer. "I was one of his adopted daughters, raised to serve him, to believe in his mission." Aubrey's voice grew distant. "Claire and I were brought up together for a time before she was sent away. She found me years later through an online support group for former cult members, asked me to watch over Eli if anything happened to her. So everything between us was a lie," Connor said bitterly. "You manipulated your way into our lives on Claire's instructions." "Not exactly." Aubrey met his gaze directly. "Claire asked me to protect Eli, but she warned me never to get close to either of you, said it would be too dangerous. I disobeyed. I convinced myself I could have what she had, a real life, a family." Her voice broke. "I was wrong, and that justifies abusing my son?" Connor's voice rose with anger. "I was trying to silence him before Raymond found out he was speaking," Aubrey said desperately. "You don't understand what he's capable of. If he learns that Eli remembers the rituals, that his conditioning worked, A high-pitched alarm suddenly blared from Connor's phone. The home security system. Multiple breach points. Connor's blood ran cold as he realized. While Aubrey had him distracted in the sunroom, someone else had entered the house. Eli! Connor bolted for the stairs, taking them two at a time, Aubrey close behind. Eli's bedroom door stood open, his bed empty. The window was intact. The security system disarmed from inside. Someone with the code. No, 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 Aubrey whispered, her face ashen. We're too late. Connor grabbed her shoulders, fingers digging in painfully. Where would he take him? Where? The community in Alabama, she said. A place called New Covenant. It's where Raymond lives now under the name Pastor Thomas Shepard. Connor released her, already moving toward his office to grab his keys and wallet. Call the police. Tell them my son has been kidnapped. The police can't help. Aubrey followed frantically. Raymond has connections. Judges, local officials. They protect him. That's how he stayed hidden all these years. Connor paused at his office door, a new calm settling over him. The deadly calm of absolute purpose. Then I'll get him back myself. You can't just walk into New Covenant, Aubrey protested. It's guarded, isolated. They'll kill you before you get near Eli. Connor opened his desk drawer and removed a small key. He unlocked the bottom drawer, one Aubrey had never seen opened during their time together, and pulled out a handgun. They can try, he said quietly. As he turned to leave, his gaze fell on Eli's latest drawing, left on the office couch during their last therapy session. It showed the scarred man, Raymond, reaching for a small boy. But unlike previous drawings, this one showed the boy standing straight, unafraid, his eyes depicted as glowing blue orbs. Beneath the drawing, in Eli's shaky handwriting, were words that sent a chill through Connor's spine. He can't hurt me anymore. The rural Alabama sheriff's station smelled of coffee and disinfectant, its fluorescent lights humming overhead as Connor paced the worn linoleum floor. 6 hours had passed since Eli's abduction, and the local authorities had been less than helpful. Sheriff Dawson, a heavy-set man with thinning hair and suspicious eyes, had taken the report with obvious skepticism. So you're saying your ex-fiancée's cult leader kidnapped your son, who happens to remember things from before he was born? The sheriff's drawl dripped with condescension. And this cult leader is actually operating a church just 15 miles from here under a different name. That's exactly what I'm saying, Connor replied, fighting to keep his voice steady. His name is Raymond Hayes, but he goes by Thomas Shepard now. He runs a place called New Covenant. The sheriff exchanged glances with his deputy. Mr. Hughes, everyone around here knows Pastor Shepard. He runs a respected religious retreat, donates to every charity in the county. Hell, he officiated my sister's wedding last spring. Connor slammed the VHS tape and Claire's journal on the desk. This is evidence of decades of abuse. Children being tortured under the guise of religious practice. My wife was one of his victims. That tape could be anything, the sheriff said dismissively. And that journal? Well, with all due respect to your late wife, people write all kinds of things when they're sick. My son is in danger, Connor insisted, desperation rising. At least send someone to check the property. Sheriff Dawson sighed. Fine. I'll send a deputy out tomorrow morning to ask a few questions. That's the best I can do without a warrant, which no judge around here is going to sign based on what you've shown me. Tomorrow morning would be too late. Connor knew it with bone-deep certainty. He thanked the sheriff and left, the weight of the gun tucked at the small of his back a grim reminder of his true intentions. In his motel room, Connor laid out everything he had gathered. Maps of the New Covenant property obtained from county records, statements from former cult members Aubrey had connected him with, and the evidence of Raymond's decades of abuse. None of it would help him get Eli back through official channels. The corruption ran too deep. His phone buzzed with a text from Julia. News vans outside your house. Someone leaked the kidnapping story. Connor's mind raced. The media attention could either help or hurt his cause. If Raymond felt cornered, there was no telling what he might do. But perhaps public pressure was the only way to force authorities to act. Making a split-second decision, Connor called the one person who might be able to help, Richard Goldman, his family lawyer. I need to make a statement, Connor explained after filling Richard in on the situation. Something that will force the police to take this seriously. Can you arrange it? 2 hours later, Connor stood before a hastily assembled group of reporters outside his Gainesville home. The story of a millionaire's autistic son kidnapped by a cult leader had spread like wildfire, drawing media from across the state. With cameras rolling, Connor laid out the whole horrific story: Claire's childhood abuse at new light, Raymond Hayes' obsession with his bloodline, the rituals performed on Claire during her pregnancy, and finally, Eli's abduction. He held up the VHS tape, described the contents, and named the officials he believed were protecting Raymond. "My son is being held at a compound called New Covenant in Chilton County, Alabama," Connor stated directly into the cameras. The man holding him, who calls himself Pastor Thomas Shepard but whose real name is Raymond Hayes, has abused children for decades while authorities looked the other way. "I'm begging law enforcement to do their job, and I'm asking anyone who has suffered at the hands of this man to come forward. You are not alone." The video went viral within hours. Former victims began posting their own stories under the hashtag #YourNewLightSurvivors. National media picked up the story, and by midnight, the Alabama State Police had taken over the investigation from the local sheriff, promising immediate action. But Connor wasn't waiting. While the media storm provided cover, he drove through the night back to Alabama, arriving at a rendezvous point where Aubrey had arranged for him to meet someone who knew the New Covenant compound intimately. The woman who stepped out of the shadows introduced herself only as Sarah. Her face was partially hidden beneath a hoodie, but Connor could see the haunted look in her eyes, the same look he'd seen in Claire's eyes during her darkest moments. "I got out 3 years ago," Sarah explained as she spread hand-drawn maps across the hood of Connor's car. "There are guards at all the main entrances, but there's a drainage culvert here that runs under the perimeter fence. It's how I escaped." "Where would they keep Eli?" Connor asked, studying the crude layouts of buildings. Sarah pointed to a small structure set apart from the others. "The sanctuary. It's where Raymond Thomas conducts his special ceremonies. If your son is as important to him as you say, that's where he'll be." As they finalized the plan, Connor's phone lit up with a text from an unknown number, a video attachment. His hands trembled as he opened it. The footage showed Eli sitting in a chair, looking small and vulnerable in a white ceremonial robe. Raymond Hayes stood behind him, one hand on the boy's shoulder. Though Eli's face was composed, his eyes held a vacant, distant look that turned Connor's blood to ice. "Connor Hughes," Raymond's voice was exactly as it had been on the VHS, smooth, authoritative, with an undercurrent of menace. "Your public display has forced my hand. The boy was meant to fulfill his purpose quietly, gradually. Now we must accelerate the process. Come alone to New Covenant. Tell no one. Or the next video you receive will be much less pleasant to watch." While Connor was still reeling from the threat, another text arrived, this one from Julia. "CNN just interviewed a woman claiming to be Raymond Hayes' daughter. Says Claire had a twin sister who supposedly died at birth. Sending link." The news clip showed a middle-aged woman identified as Martha Kellerman, a former New Light member. "Raymond kept meticulous records of his special children," she explained to the reporter. "Claire Hayes had a twin sister. The official records say she died during childbirth, but that was a lie. Raymond kept one twin and gave the other away. His way of conducting a nature versus nurture experiment with his own blood." Connor's mind spun with implications as pieces fell into horrible place. If Claire had a twin sister, and that sister had been raised by Raymond. His phone rang. "Aubrey, have you seen the news?" Her voice was tight with emotion. "The twin sister," Connor said. "It's you, isn't it? You're Claire's twin." A long silence stretched between them. "Yes," Aubrey finally whispered. "I never knew until Claire found me. She recognized me immediately, said it was like looking in a mirror. That's when we both realized what Raymond had done." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was ashamed." Aubrey's voice broke. "I was raised to be everything Claire escaped, to believe in Raymond's mission. Even after I left, even after I knew the truth, there was still a part of me that..." She trailed off. "That what?" "That was jealous," she admitted. "Claire got away. She had a normal life, a loving husband, a child. I had nothing but years of abuse and brainwashing. When she asked me to watch over Eli if anything happened to her, I agreed. But then I met you, and I wanted what she had. I thought I could replace her. And when Eli started to remember," Connor pieced together, "you panicked, tried to silence him. I was trying to protect him, protect all of us," Aubrey insisted. "If he started talking about what Raymond did, I knew Raymond would come for him. And I was right." Connor ended the call, his mind reeling from the revelation. The woman who had abused his son was Claire's identical twin, a woman who shared not only Claire's face but the trauma of Raymond Hayes' twisted obsession with bloodlines. As dawn broke over the Alabama hills, Connor approached the New Covenant compound, alone and armed with nothing but the truth, the evidence he'd gathered, and a desperate father's determination to save his son, no matter the cost. The county jail visiting room was clinically impersonal. Beige walls, fluorescent lighting that cast everyone in a sickly pallor, and the constant, subtle hum of surveillance cameras tracking every movement. Aubrey sat across from Connor, separated by a scratched plexiglass divider. The orange jumpsuit hung loosely on her frame. 2 weeks in custody had left her looking hollowed out, the resemblance to Claire now painful in its clarity. "They're charging me with child endangerment," she said, her voice tinny through the telephone receiver. "Conspiracy to kidnap. Obstruction of justice." A bitter smile flitted across her face. Ironic, considering I spent my life as one of his victims. Connor studied her, still struggling to reconcile the woman who had nearly struck his son with the complex truth of who she was. Claire's twin, Raymond's prisoner, a woman warped by a lifetime of manipulation. "The prosecutors might reduce charges if you testify against Raymond," he said, his voice deliberately neutral. "Your statements helped the FBI build their case." Aubrey's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I'll tell them everything. Every ritual, every child, every official he bribed." She leaned forward, pressing her palm against the plexiglass. "But first I need to know, how is Eli?" The mention of his son's name sent a shiver through Connor. Memories of that night at New Covenant still razor-sharp despite the passing days. The drainage culvert Sarah had identified, cold water soaking through his clothes as he crawled through darkness. The compound buildings rising like ghostly sentinels in the pre-dawn light. The small, separate structure, the sanctuary, its windows glowing with an eerie amber light. "Eli is..." Connor paused, searching for words. "He's healing, speaking more every day. The trauma specialists say his progress is remarkable, considering what he's been through." What he didn't say was how he'd found his son that night. Not cowering in fear as he'd expected, but sitting calmly in a chair while Raymond Hayes, caught off guard by Connor's unexpected entry, had backed away from the boy with an expression of confusion bordering on fear. He wouldn't respond to the conditioning, Aubrey guessed, reading Connor's expression. Raymond's techniques didn't work on him. Connor nodded slowly. Raymond kept saying Eli was resistant, that something was blocking his influence. He recalled the old man's frustration, his increasingly desperate attempts to elicit some reaction from the silent child. By the time the FBI tactical team stormed the compound, Raymond was the one who looked broken. Aubrey let out a long breath. "Claire always said Eli had a light in him that couldn't be dimmed. I thought it was just maternal pride, but maybe..." She trailed off, lost in thought. "There's something I need to ask you," Connor said, shifting the conversation. "Something only you can answer. About Claire." "Yes. The 3 days she disappeared during her pregnancy. What really happened?" Aubrey's expression darkened. Raymond had her brought to a previous compound in Tennessee. He performed what he called in utero awakening rituals. Forced her to drink concoctions of herbs and who knows what else. Made her listen to recordings of his chanting for hours on end. All designed to, in his words, open the unborn child's spiritual eyes. "And you believe that's why Eli remembers things he couldn't possibly have seen? Why he knew about the man with the scar?" "I don't know what I believe anymore," Aubrey admitted. "But I know what I saw when I tried to silence him that day." Her voice faltered. "When I raised my hand to him, he looked at me with eyes that seemed ancient, like he could see right through me, see everything I'd ever done or thought. It terrified me." The memory of finding them together that day still twisted Connor's stomach into knots, but he forced himself to focus on what mattered now. "When the FBI searched Raymond's quarters," he said carefully, "they found files, records going back decades, including birth certificates." He watched her face closely. Claire's original birth certificate listed her birth mother's name, Catherine Hayes. Aubrey's face drained of color. "Raymond's sister?" "Yes, which means Raymond wasn't just your cult leader. He was your uncle." Aubrey closed her eyes, absorbing this final cruel truth. That explains why he was so obsessed with Claire's pregnancy, why he called us his pure bloodline. A tear slipped down her cheek. All those years of abuse, We were family. Connor left the jail with a heaviness in his chest, but also a strange sense of clarity. The truth, however ugly, was finally coming to light. Raymond Hayes was in federal custody, facing dozens of charges as former cult members came forward with their stories. The investigation had expanded to include local officials who had protected him, with more arrests expected. As Connor drove home, his phone rang through the car speakers. "Mr. Hughes, this is Dr. Winters. I just finished today's session with Eli, and there's something you should know." Connor's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Is he all right?" "More than all right," the doctor said, an undercurrent of amazement in her voice. "He brought a drawing today, the one he's been working on all week. It's not the locked cabinet anymore. It's the cabinet open, with light pouring out." And he spoke in complete sentences for the first time. He said, "Mommy told me to keep Daddy safe. Now the bad man can't hurt us anymore." Tears blurred Connor's vision as he pulled into his driveway. Through the front window, he could see Ms. Lorraine sitting with Eli at the kitchen table, their heads bent together over what appeared to be a photo album. The elderly woman had become a steadying presence in their lives, filling some of the grandmother-shaped hole that neither of Eli's biological grandmothers could fill. As Connor entered, Eli looked up with those impossibly blue eyes, Claire's eyes, now bright with recognition, and remarkably, peace. "Dad," he said, his voice small but clear. "Ms. Lorraine showed me pictures of Mom when she was happy." Ms. Lorraine patted the boy's hand. "I saved all the photos from our garden talks. Thought the boy should see his mother as she really was, not as that monster tried to make her." Connor sat beside his son, studying the photographs spread across the table. Claire laughing beside Ms. Lorraine's rose bushes. Claire pregnant, her hands cradling her belly protectively. Claire holding infant Eli, looking exhausted, but radiant. Ms. Lorraine slid an envelope across the table. "She gave me this the week before she passed. Made me swear not to give it to you unless something happened with the boy. Said you'd know when it was time." She stood with a groan. "Think I'll make some tea and give you two a moment." With trembling fingers, Connor opened the envelope to find a single sheet of Claire's stationery. If you're reading this, then our story only continues because our son found his voice. Connor, what I could never tell you in life was that my past wouldn't stay buried. Raymond found me again. When I learned I was sick, I knew I had to prepare for the worst. I reached out to Aubrey. Yes, I knew about my twin. We found each other years ago. I asked her to watch over Eli if anything happened to me, but to keep her distance from both of you. I fear I've only put you all in greater danger. Eli is special, Connor. Not in the way Raymond believes, with his twisted obsession with bloodlines and spiritual gifts, but in the way every child is special, perfect in their uniqueness, deserving of protection and love. Whatever happens, remember that our love created something stronger than Raymond's hate could ever destroy." Connor looked up to find Eli watching him intently, a wisdom in his gaze that seemed both entirely new and achingly familiar. "The monster wanted me to see bad things," Eli said slowly, carefully forming each word. "But I only saw Mommy being brave. And now we're safe, right?" Connor pulled his son into a tight embrace, his tears falling freely now. "Yes, buddy. We're safe now." Over Eli's shoulder, Connor caught sight of a final photograph in the album. Claire, in profile, gazing toward a sunset, her expression serene despite the visible effects of her illness. It was the Claire he remembered best, determined, unbroken, facing whatever came with quiet courage. Her final gift had been exactly what they needed most, the truth that set them all free. Sometimes the darkest secrets are buried within our own families, passed down through generations like a terrible inheritance. Connor's journey reminds us that true courage isn't about facing external dangers, but about confronting the painful truths we'd rather leave hidden. What would you have done in Connor's position? Would you have had the strength to keep digging when each discovery only revealed more horror? Or would you have chosen blissful ignorance to protect what remained of your shattered world? The bond between parent and child can be both our greatest vulnerability and our greatest source of strength. In the end, it wasn't Connor's wealth or determination that saved Eli. It was Claire's foresight, born from her own suffering, that created the path to their freedom. And it was Eli himself, a child deemed broken by the outside world, who proved stronger than the legacy of abuse that tried to claim him. Perhaps this is the most profound lesson of their story, that our wounds don't define us, and even the smallest voice can break generations of silence when it finally finds the courage to speak. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear that darkness can be overcome. Your support allows us to continue bringing these powerful human stories to light. Let us know in the comments what moved you most about Connor and Eli's journey, and what other stories of resilience and triumph you'd like to hear next.